This is just an example of a variety of the disk drives that you might see in legacy systems. There's the 8-inch on the far left. Then you have a 5 1/4, which is basically circa 1980s. And then the 3.5-inch, which is basically during the 90s, and even up to this day. They even had drives called super disks, which looked like the 3.5-inch drive, except that it held about 120 megs, or basically about 10 times as much more memory. Finding these drives, if you've run across the floppies themselves, sometimes can be challenging. That's when you go to eBay and start looking for drives. But be cautious. You will have to have a PC that has a floppy disk port on it, which means it has to be an XT or circa probably 1990s, and also be slow enough to be able to run a floppy. Here's a wide variety of the new media types that are out there, everything from SD cards to XXD to super speed SD cards, micro SD cards. These can range from anything from the size of a normal USB thumb drive or a postage stamp all the way down to something about 1/10 the size of a postage stamp. You normally see those in the small cameras or the cell phones today, but they can be large, anywhere from 8 gigabytes all the way up to 128 and sometimes even 512 gigabytes. And of course, if you start doing forensics on multimedia cards, the best thing to do is to find a multimedia drive, such as the one pictured here, that would take the variety and different types of drives that are out there and media types. There's also a multitude of adapters that are USB enabled, so you can plug it into your USB port and still read the multimedia card itself. Now we'll talk about hard drive types. Mainly in the world today, you'll see the older IDE. Even before IDE, there was MFM, but very rarely seen today. So we'll start off with the IDE, which means Integrated Device Electronics, or otherwise known as a parallel ATA, or a PATA drive. SATA is a serial ATA drive. That is the most common. In the business world and in servers, which you'll see are SAS drives, serial attached SCSI, or a SCSI drive, which means Small Computer Systems Interface. That actually is one of the oldest versions of a hard drive around. The original Apples had SCSI drives. The newest ones would be the new solid-state drives. Those are becoming more and more popular because of their speed and their size. Most hard drives are the same, whether they're SCSI, SAS, SATA, or PATA. They'll have platters. They'll have a head that reads the platters that actually floats on a cushion of air above the platter. You'll have an actuator arm that goes back and forth so you can read the different tracks on a hard drive platter. The spindle's in the center, and the actuator, which is a very strong magnet which moves that the actuator arm back and forth in a precise distance in a very precise amount of time. So here we have the hard drive type IDE and the cable that's involved in IDE drive. Normally IDE cables only have 2 connectors on them for drive 0 and drive 1. When you're actually looking at a drive as they boot up, the master, drive 0, would be the first one you'd see, and then the second one would be drive 1, or the slave. The color designations are almost always a blue connector for the motherboard, a black connector for the main or drive 0 IDE drive, and a gray for the secondary or slave drive. Some of the limitations we had with both IDE and EIDE drives were you can only have 4 hard drives on a system, 2 different IDE cables with 2 drives on each. And you always had a primary port and a secondary port, otherwise known as a master-slave operation. There was a 127 gigabyte limit to the IDE drive, but they are cheap. They're no longer available in most stores, but they're on eBay and in surplus stores everywhere, and normally charge anywhere from $1 to $2 a piece. But once again, they're very small in size and slow compared to the SATA drive today. Here's our most popular drive today, the SATA. It uses two sets of cables. One is a power cable, the one you see on the left at the top photo, and on the right is his actual serial ATA data cable. The center photo has a picture. On that picture, the card edge on the left side is actually the serial ATA data cable connector side, and on the right side is where the power is connected. Then in the bottom photo you see the SATA motherboard. You can always tell where the SATA ports are because they'll either be blue or orange in color. You'll notice here that the eSATA type is a different cable connector, and on the outside of a drive, such as you see in the center, it will always state that it's an eSATA connector, and a SATA drive connector will not be able to be put into that, nor would a USB connector. So you have to get an eSATA cable to be able to connect those drives to a hard drive, to a hard disk, or to a PC. The real advantage to SATA and eSATA is you have multiple drives per system, up to 128 of them. They can be listed as primary, secondary, or master-slave also on ports. There is not a 127 gigabyte limit on the SATA drives. They can be terabytes in size, and they're cheap. They are available in stores, and they are the most popular drive. SAS drive is a newer type of SAS drive today and requires a different cable that looks a lot like a SATA cable, except that the center of it has a special key so that you can't mistakenly put a SATA cable into a SAS drive or vice versa. SAS drives are a lot faster in their performance, and that's why they're very popular in servers. It has the same capabilities of the SATA drive, where they can have up to 128 drives in a system. They can be literally terabytes in size, but they're operating at about 2 to 3 times the speed of a SATA drive. On all motherboards, SAS connectors will be red. As I said before, the SAS drives can have multiple drives in a system. They're extremely fast. They're a high performance hard drive, and they're usually used in high performance PCs and servers, especially in video streaming. They are more expensive than a SATA by about 2 to 3 times the cost. SCSI is the oldest drive type. You can see here is the original SCSI 50-pin cable. You can normally connect up to 4 SCSI drives on a SCSI card, but you could have multiple SCSI cards also. Down below you'll see that the connectors for SCSI changed over the years. You have the original 50-pin on the bottom, and then the faster 138-pin SCSI cable on top. The difference mainly is you take a look at these connectors, the more pins they had, the faster the drive for it was. These are extremely popular within server systems, and very rarely did you see them in a PC for the home, with the exception of Apple. A lot of the old Macintoshes did have SCSI drives contained within their casings. Once again, the SCSI, you can have 7 to 15 drives per system, and today you can even increase that by adding in more SCSI cards. They're extremely fast, usually used in high performance PCs, but they are more expensive than an IDE or a SATA drive. Here are an example of some of the external drive connectors for SCSI drives. Now we're getting into the SSD drives. These are basically a hard drive on a chip. They're used extensively in cell phones, tablets, and laptops. They're becoming the most popular laptop drive. In fact, there's even a hybrid that uses an SSD as the boot drive, and then a secondary drive is a small 1 or 2 inch hard drive. You may run across some legacy systems or cameras, the PCMCIA drives. This is a Type 3 drive. They call it a Type 3 because it's 3 times the size of a normal PCMCIA card. They were used mainly in laptops and also in electronic cameras.